When you think of Family Guy, you might be inclined to think that Peter is the worst member of the family. He's super irresponsible, disrespectful, impulsive, and of course, hilarious. But actually, Lois has no trouble of holding her own against her husband and has done a ton of seriously questionable things herself. If you love Family Guy content and more, why not hit the red subscribe button and ring the notification bell to stay up to date on the latest from us here at ScreenRant. Corruption scandal. While Peter's antics usually only affect him and the people around him, Lois's wrongdoings have been on a slightly bigger scale. Like the time she became mayor of Quahog and almost immediately started embezzling money for her own gain. While she did manage to start by cleaning up Lake Quahog like she promised, there was a little money left over from the effort. $600 to be exact. It took her literally no time and no convincing to use the money to buy herself a purse, and then the ball really started rolling. She finds a $4,300 fur coat, and rather than just stealing the money from the citizens again, she allows the president of Quahog Oil, Bob Grossman, to bribe her with it in exchange for letting him dump oil in the lake again, going back on the entire reason that she ran for mayor in the first place. She does eventually come to learn the error of her ways and give the job back to Mayor West, but the fact that she was in office for barely a minute before she became totally corrupt says a little something about Lois's nature. Stealing. In the episode Breaking Out is hard to do, it all starts innocently enough when Lois is short on cash at the grocery store and proceeds to hide a ham in her purse. But it quickly becomes a habit, and the next thing we know, Lois is inside a store called Madeline's Boutique, shoveling everything she can get her hand on into her bag while cackling like the Wicked Witch of the West. We even see her in her car after, so thrilled by the rush of it all that she puts a cigarette out in her arm. She snowballs into a full-on kleptomaniac and quickly fills the house with all of the things she has stolen, complete with an original Matisse. When Brian eventually confronts her about her habits, Lois in an auto parts store stealing mufflers, and while he does convince her to put everything back, Joe catches her before she has the chance. She's sentenced to 3 years in prison for all of her crimes, and actually ends up going to jail. Injuring Stewie. In the episode Brian Griffin's House of Pain, we really get a good glimpse into just how dark Lois can be. Early in the episode, Meg is chasing Chris, who just read her diary, and they accidentally knock Stewie down the stairs. Stewie falls unconscious, and the kids, fearing the reaction from their parents about it, decide to just go on and pretend Stewie is totally fine. They put a hat on him to hide the giant head wound that they've caused, and go full weekend at Bernie's to convince their family he is actually conscious and not at all gravely injured. Eventually, Peter catches them and reveals he used to knock them out all the time when they were babies, and decided to help them frame Lois for the whole thing. So instead of taking Stewie to the hospital, Peter throws Stewie behind Lois's car just as she is backing out of the driveway, causing her to run over him. Lois gets out of the car and panics, but rather than calling an ambulance, she tells Peter they need to cover it up, to get a big hat to hide the wound and makeup to draw eyeballs on top of his closed eyelids. So maybe she isn't worse than Peter in this case, but she's definitely just as bad. Her modeling career. Lois has made it clear over the years that while she loves her kids, she definitely resents them for getting in the way of the life she could have had. No episode makes this more clear than model misbehavior, when Lois becomes a successful model overnight. While at dinner with her parents, she recalls being a teenager who dreamed of modeling, but that Carter wouldn't let her go after her dreams. In order to go against his wishes, Lois gets an agent and quickly rises up the ranks, from modeling for Goldman's Pharmacy to the pages of Vogue and covers of Cosmopolitan magazine and the Victoria's Secret catalog. Along the way, she starts by wearing some super low-cut jeans and heels around the house, and eventually completely abandons the responsibility of taking care of her kids and being with her family. She also becomes totally addicted to diet pills and starts staying out all night to party with the fashion elite. While at first he was happy to show her off, Peter becomes extremely jealous of all the attention that Lois now gets from men and conspires with Carter to kidnap her and bring her home. While Lois might ultimately be happy that she settled down to have a family, it's pretty clear that she'll take any chance to get away from them and start a new life. Christmas Rampage. Sometimes Lois's crazy behavior is actually pretty understandable, especially when it becomes obvious that if Peter would just give her a little help every now and then, she probably wouldn't lash out quite as much. In the episode of Very Special Family Guy Freakin' Christmas, we see this whole thing made very, very clear. Lois has been trying to get Peter to donate a gift to charity, and instead of doing that, he accidentally donates all of the family's gifts instead. Lois keeps it together for this, and the family goes to the mall to buy new gifts, leaving Brian in charge of making sure that the turkey doesn't burn. Well, Brian manages to burn down the entire interior of the house, as well as the turkey, which still doesn't seem to faze Lois. But then, Meg tells her that they are out of paper towels, and Lois snaps and sets out on a rampage. She starts by throwing the turkey through the microwave, smashing the presents, crashing through the window, and running into the street. She shoves George Bailey off a bridge, decapitates Frosty the Snowman before spitting fire at him and melting him to death. She gets to the town square and climbs the giant Christmas tree, intent on ripping the star off the top before getting shot with a tranquilizer dart at Peter's request. Inciting violence. No one in the Griffin household is a stranger to violence, and Lois herself is actually one of the most violent of them all. In Season 9, she becomes a boxer, and in Season 3, she joins Bonnie at a taijutsu class and becomes a black belt almost immediately. She becomes such a good fighter that it carries over into her life, and as Quahog is overrun with New Yorkers visiting to check out the fall foliage, there are plenty of people for her to fight. She beats up a man who is about to get into a bar fight with Peter, who starts using Lois to get rid of the New Yorkers who he hates. But what he didn't predict is that Lois would get way more into fighting than he expected. She actually attacks her sensei and becomes way too aggressive in the bedroom with Peter. Eventually, they go to therapy where they learn to live more peacefully. But that peace is short-lived, and the family quickly disintegrates into one of the most epic, all-out, over-the-top brawls of the show's history of epic, all-out, over-the-top brawls. Younger years. In the episode And I'm Joyce Kinney, Lois befriends news anchor Joyce Kinney, who takes Lois out for drinks. While she's under the influence, Lois admits to Joyce that she once starred in an adult movie called Quest for Fur, which Joyce then uses as a news story. While that may seem like a pretty terrible thing to do, she later reveals the reason why she went to such lengths to humiliate Lois. Lois didn't remember, but the two actually went to high school together, and while Joyce was unpopular, Lois was one of the cheerleaders and a huge bully. Lois humiliated Joyce one day when she lied to Joyce about having made the cheer squad, blindfolded her, brought her into the gym in front of the entire school, put a hot dog in her mouth, and pulled down her pants. Joyce understandably had a hard time getting over the humiliation, and retaliated years later by humiliating Lois right back. Weirdly, Lois was able to redeem herself by playing her movie Quest for Fur at church for the entire congregation. Meg's mom. While we all know Lois may be a pretty questionable mom, that's a fact that seems to be lost on Lois herself. This is no more clear than in the episode Seahorse Seashell Party. The family gets stuck in the house with yet another power outage because of a hurricane, but instead of going full Star Wars or even Grimm's fairy tales about the situation, the family instead pretty much all turn on Meg. Except for Brian, who's tripping on mushrooms, and Stewie, who is trying to help him through it in the other room. It's pretty normal for the family to gang up on Meg, but this time just proves too much for her, and she totally snaps. And we don't really blame her for it. When Lois starts scolding Meg for asking Chris why he's so mean to her, Meg lets her mom have it for the first time ever. And she's totally right. Lois is neglectful, jealous, mean, and an all-around terrible mother to Meg. And the worst part is that even after hearing all of the ways that she has hurt her daughter, while Lois does cry and agree for a minute that she isn't a great mother, a few minutes later she just goes right back to blaming Meg for all of it. Drugs. It's been a bit of a running gag throughout the show that Lois has a history with drugs, and boy oh boy does she. As we see in the episode Deep Throats, when she and Peter form a folk duo that is pretty dependent on weed to think they sound good. Which they don't. This wouldn't be such a bad thing until we find Lois and Peter naked on the couch in front of Stewie and Brian, and then licking Chris like he's an ice cream cone later in the episode. Then there was the time when she made her adult movie Quest for Fur in exchange for money for cocaine from a guy named Raoul and his friend, the other guy. Also, the time that the family started cooking meth on their new farm almost immediately after they moved. There's the episode where she seems to know a bit too much about the street value of 4.5 kilos of uncut Nicaraguan after Brian becomes a police dog. She gets addicted to diet pills when she becomes a model, and the list goes on and on and on. Cheating on Peter. Now, with a husband like Peter, it's pretty understandable that Lois might be driven to look elsewhere at times. Even though Peter and Lois seem to have a pretty active marriage, that has not stopped Lois from stepping out of bounds on more than one occasion. There was, of course, the time when Peter and Bill Clinton became best friends. When Lois shows up to Bill's hotel to talk him out of partying with Peter, the two somehow end up sleeping together. This leads to a whole thing about Peter sleeping with Lois's mom in return, but still, Lois definitely started it. And then there was the time where Lois develops a serious crush on the only nice, normal, attractive guy to ever be interested in her daughter Meg. Meg catches the two making out, and Lois accuses Peter of driving her her into Anthony's arms by calling her old. And those are only 2 of the times that she stepped out on Peter, because we need an entire other list video to cover all of her other extramarital moments. Despite all of her insanity, we still can't help but love Lois for the messed up person she is. In fact, it even makes her more fun. What do you think of Lois? Is she worse than Peter or driven to extremes because of him? Would you want Lois as your mom? Let us know in the comments and make sure to click subscribe to keep up with all of the latest from ScreenRant.